In the following research seminar, Professor Joseph Cheng, IIBG Distinguished Professor and Professor Emeritus of Business Administration from the College of Business at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in the USA, addresses the challenging topic of translating business innovation into competitive advantage. He explores the significant heterogeneity in innovation, from limited incremental innovations to breakthrough innovations that reshape the market, and he considers some examples of innovation in Australia. Professor Cheng then closes the seminar by focusing on what this tide of innovation could mean for Hong Kong firms.
I would like to spend a few minutes, first of all, to talk about the changing landscape of global competition. And then the second part of my talk has to do with innovation. What it is, what are some of the essential components of innovation as a topic for research, and also as a topic for policy decision making. And then the third part is, of course, implications for Hong Kong. And that is the part that I would like to involve the audience. But before we get to the Hong Kong part, I also want to maybe share with you some of my research findings on Australia. Because I spent 3 years in Australia as the Michael Crouch Chair in Innovation. And I have done research on innovation in Australia and also in other countries in Asia Pacific. So I'm going to share with you some thoughts about Australia. And maybe we can use that as a springboard, if you will, to talking about implications for Hong Kong. Now, the first major item under the changing landscape of global competition should be of no surprise to you all. You are in Asia, in the Asia-Pacific region, very close to the mainland China. So the idea that the world's center of economic gravity has shifted from the West to Asia is not anything new to people in this region. But it is news, if you will, to a lot of people outside of the Asia-Pacific region, even to a lot of the audience in Australia. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this particular slide. But what I do want to highlight is a report published by McKinsey. This is a very interesting report. It's a very detailed research report documenting the shift of the world's economic center of gravity over the last 1,000 years. And as reported by this research team, the center of gravity has been moved over the last 1,000 years from the east to the west, and now it's coming back. The second one, which I believe is more important for us to spend some time on, is the basis of economic competition on a worldwide basis has shifted. And the way that I frame this conversation is to shift from competition based on efficiency to competition based on innovation. So let me elaborate on these two concepts a little bit here. In the case of efficiency, most people who study this topic would argue that there are 2 or 3 things that we need to keep in mind. Efficiency means that you want to get the most out of the least amount of input. So it's kind of an output-input ratio. That's what we mean by efficiency. The more efficient a machine is, or a person is, an organization is, a country is, that means with a given amount of input resources, the agent, either it's a person, a company, a country, is able to produce much more or more efficiently than the other agents who have the same amount of money or resources is produced at a lower level. Now, in order for efficiency to give you the benefit that we all know about from allocation of resources, one key aspect of it is that whether it is a person, whether it's a company, or whether it is a country, has to do certain things. And the one important element that gives you efficiency is you do the same thing over and over and over and over, so that you will do it in a way that will have minimum errors. And that's learning effect. So what that means is that efficiency comes from doing the same thing over and over and over. Now, innovation is just the opposite. Innovation is doing something new and different. So we will talk about that a little bit later. So here, the basic idea is that for the longest time, efficiency is a competitive advantage for individuals or for companies or for countries. And efficiency has to do with having the knowledge about cause and effect relationships, about how things work. And usually this knowledge comes from research. That's why we call it scientific knowledge. And then once you have this knowledge, then you will be able to use the knowledge to increase your efficiency. Now, again, for the longest time, there has been a lot of scientific research on how things work, and you can access this knowledge either by your own research or by buying the research through other sources. But until recently, there have been a huge stock of underused knowledge. But then when knowledge becomes more readily available, just look at the internet now. You can almost get any information through the internet. So what that means is that knowledge is now so readily available, and if you have the knowledge, then you can increase efficiency. That means efficiency is no longer a competitive advantage. If everybody has the same knowledge, that means nobody has advantage. So efficiency is no longer a basis of competition. That's the primary basis of competition. If you don't have the knowledge, if you're not efficient, you're out of the game. So what is it that you need in order to be competitive? So competitive advantage now comes with what we call innovation. And innovation means a couple of things: creating new knowledge, or using existing knowledge in a new way, or in a multiple set of new ways, not just one way. Another thing to keep in mind is that innovation requires experimentation. And experimentation means failures. And failures means opportunities for learning. So whoever is interested in innovation, whether this is a person or a company or a country, would have to be willing to experiment. If you are going to experiment, that means you will have to accept failures. And then the smart people, the smart companies and the smart countries will learn from failures instead of blaming someone for the failure. And that is an important set of elements for us to understand before we talk about how to become innovative. Everybody wants to be innovative. Every country wants to be innovative. Every company wants to be innovative. But are we willing to experiment? And then even if you are willing to experiment, are you willing to accept failures? And then even if you are willing to accept failures, are you able to learn from failures? So these are all the requirements for innovation. So with this as background, let's move on. What I have here is a list of some relevant ideas for us to think about when we try to contrast efficiency-based competition with innovation-based competition. If your mindset is efficiency-based competition, you will probably do all the things on the left-hand side. And then if you are willing to or interested in to become more of an innovation-based competitor, then you have to start thinking about the items on the right-hand side. And I just want to highlight a few things here. One item which is very interesting is if you are a subordinate and you have a new idea that you want to bring to the attention of your supervisor, and then obviously you want your supervisor to take your idea and adopt it, then the conversation will go something like this. If it is an efficiency-based company or efficiency-based culture, if I were to bring that idea to my superior and say, hey, can we do this differently? Maybe we can try this instead of doing what you have been telling me to do. Then the supervisor will probably say to you, has your way been done before? If you say no, then the supervisor will say, well, then I don't want to try it. Let someone else tries it first. If it works, you come back to me. All right, that's the left-hand side. Has this been done before? If the answer is yes, it has been done before, and then the second question I would ask you as a supervisor, did it work? And then if you were to say, yeah, it worked well, and I said, okay, let's do it that way. Efficiency, right? Now what about the other culture or the other way of looking at doing things new and different? Is that, again, I come to you and I say, well, why don't we try it this way? And then you ask me, has this been done before? I say, no, it has not been done before. If you're an innovation-oriented supervisor, then you'll say, wow, that is great. That means we have the opportunity to be the leader, to set the standard. And we will have the competitive advantage over our competitors. So it's a very different way of thinking about something different. And then another one which is also important to understand is, if we are a business, and we are an innovative business, that means we are going to introduce a lot of new products. And then when you try to sell that product, the buyer will come to you, and then the buyer will say, oh, this is a new product. So I'm taking some risk. I'm buying a new product. So in order for me to buy your new product, I have to have a lot of trust in you. So if you're an innovative business or innovative company, you have to build trust with your customers. Or you have to have a brand name that's so trustworthy that the buyer will be able or willing to take the risk to buy your product. Whereas if it is an efficiency-based organization, that means you have been doing those things over and over. You don't really need a lot of trust from your customers because this is not a new product. There's less risk. All right, so again, with this as background, let's move on to explore some other ideas here. So the title of this slide is Heterogeneity in Innovation. So what that means is that innovation comes in many different forms and different shapes, and many different kinds of innovation. So even though we talk about innovation as if it is just one thing, it is really not. So the first thing I want to talk about has to do with the different levels of innovation. The most common ones are the one at the bottom of the list. Those are what we call the incremental innovations. An example would be from Windows 7 to Windows 8, Windows 8 to, I don't know, is it Windows 10? And Gillette, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Gillette, for the gentleman here. It started out as a one-blade razor. But over the years, Gillette has become very, very good at incremental innovation, putting all the new features in incremental ways. And now the Gillette razor is a lot more sophisticated than the old one. So that's an example of a company that's very good at incremental innovation. Now, the other extreme would be what we call the breakthrough innovations. Breakthrough innovations are very innovative in the sense that it's very original. It has a wide impact. It has long-term benefits coming back to the originating company or individual. And some examples are the transistor would be one. Old technologies no longer benefiting anyone now because it's all replaced. But then another one would be the jet engine. We are still basically using the same jet engine. The basic design of the jet engine is very much the same as the jet engine from many, many years ago. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. Now this is a scientific breakthrough. It is a very good example of how powerful interdisciplinary research can be, because it combines a lot of original ideas coming from many different disciplines to create this MRI. So that's what we call the breakthrough innovation. Now, in between the two levels or extremes are the kind of the intermediate innovations. And there are different terms for it. You may have heard of the term disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation has many different meanings here, but for me, I just want to use this as an illustration of kind of a intermediate level of innovation between the incremental at the low end and the breakthrough at the high end. And some examples of this would be the iPad. And another thing to remember about disruptive innovation is a lot of these innovations are what we call recombinant innovations. Recombinant innovations are innovations that combine existing innovations, but do so in a way that creates something new and better. So it's kind of recombination. It's not truly original, but it creates something so good that it disrupts the market. Or if it's a scientific field, it disrupts the scientific field. And then everybody has to come up with new ideas to respond to it. So those are the three categories of innovation that I would like you to keep in mind as we talk about competing in an innovation-driven economy. So at what level do you want to compete? You want to compete at the lowest level, incremental? Or you want to compete at the intermediate level, the disruptive or recombinant innovation? Or do you want to compete at the highest level, the breakthrough innovation? Or do you want to compete at all three levels? Something to keep in mind. For a person, as an innovator, as a faculty member, as a scientist, as a company, as a country. But these are things that you as an innovator, you may have to ask yourself, at what level do I want to compete? And the second question is, do I have the ability to do it, or the resources to do it? So those three concepts have to do with the levels of innovation, but then also there are different kinds. We can talk about product innovation or service innovation. And then we can also talk about process innovation. So those are the three terms that are most common when we talk about business innovation. And then the other separation here has to do with whether it is technological in nature or whether it's non-technical but organizational, or management innovation or organizational innovation. It has more to do with human beings, the organizational side. Technological innovation has more with machines or technologies. All right, so let's move on to the next bullet item here. Now, business model, again, this will be just a very quick introduction here. Business model innovation usually involves one or more of these four dimensions. It might have to do with the offerings, that means the product or the service. Or it might have something to do with customer experience. The most interesting example here is to talk about Starbucks. So the question is, what business is Starbucks in? Is Starbucks a coffee selling business, or is it something else? For those of you who might have studied Starbucks before, what would be your reaction to this? If I were to tell you that, yeah, Starbucks is a coffee shop selling coffee. It seems like it, right? But in fact, that's not. Starbucks doesn't sell coffee, even though it sells you coffee. Starbucks sells customer experience. They call it the Starbucks experience. And you can define it any way you wish. And that's business innovation. And then another dimension has to do with internal process. Dell Computer, for example, competes primarily on the idea that when it was first started, the competition that gives them the edge, if you will, is that they custom make everything online or by customer order, so there's no inventory, no nothing. And then Toyota also is very known for the Toyota way of manufacturing. So it has some more to do with the internal processes. And then the last item has to do with the delivery. USA Today would be a very good example. Again, when it got started, USA Today was one of the few, if not the first, newspapers to deliver news in digital form, not just in print form. So same print, same content, but delivery is different. So when we talk about business innovation, there are four major ways through which you can be innovative. Now, there are two other items I want to talk to you a little bit about, and one has to do with R&D internationalization. What is important here is that many multinational corporations are now doing the R&D outside of the home market or the home base, and they establish laboratories overseas. And there are two important things to keep in mind here. One is what we call the spillover effect of international R&D. What that means is that if you have a foreign company coming to your country or your city or your region, and with investment to do R&D, there will be technology spillover to the local area. And that will have very long-term impact. Singapore will be one good example of being a small country able to benefit greatly from technological spillovers with a lot of foreign companies coming to Singapore to do R&D. Okay, another concept to keep in mind has to do with the concept of worldwide learning and innovation. And again, this applies to multinational corporations having their operations, their subsidiaries overseas, not just to sell the product, but to tap into what we call the innovation resources, and then also to monitor emerging trends that might have global implications. The faster you can learn about emerging trends in different parts of the world, and the faster you can respond to those trends that are not yet global phenomenon, but have the potential to be global phenomenon, then you have a competitive advantage over your competitors. So this is also part of innovation, being first to respond to opportunities or threats through a combination of either product or technologies or some other ways of delivering our business. The S-curve is a natural phenomenon, if you will, that applies to many different topics. But here I would like to focus it on innovation. And specifically to talk about innovation adoption. So what that means is there's something new out there, whether that something new will be adopted fast or slow. And then also to talk about innovation adoption benefit. What kind of benefit will come to the user if you adopt an innovation. It turns out that both phenomena here can be described by the S-curve. The S-curve looks something like this. Slow, sharp, trend up, and then level off. It might come down, or it might go back up. Yeah. All right. Now, there are two different stories here, and I think both stories are important for us to understand, and in particular for companies to keep in mind if they're interested in getting into the innovation game, if you will. One is, if you are a company introducing a lot of innovations, then you should expect the following. Whatever the innovation is, the adoption rate initially is going to be very slow. But then, enough people have adopted it and benefited from it, then there will be a sharp increase in the adoption of the new product or new technology or new way of doing things. And then once it reaches the highest point, then again it will taper off. Chances are there will be competitors coming in, something better than yours, and then the adoption will go to the other new product or new processes. So that's S-curve there. And then innovation adoption benefit. So to what extent you as a user will benefit from it also follows an S-curve. Just think about you changing your cell phone from an Android to an iPhone or iPhone to an Android. Or if you've been using PC and you suddenly switched over to a Mac. Are you going to be productive the first few weeks, the first few days? No, it will be negative benefit. But then once you master it, then you will benefit greatly from it. So what's important for us to understand the S-curve as part of innovation? Well, it's important because if you are going to benefit from innovation, you have to be willing to go through that very difficult initial period. And the initial period meaning what? You're not going to benefit from it. You are going to suffer from it before you can actually benefit from it. Again, very important for us to understand that. And then if you are selling innovation, or you're trying to promote your innovation, what that means is you have to be patient. Initially, the adoption is going to be very, very slow. But enough adopters have tried it, and they like it, and you are patient enough to go through that period, then you will benefit greatly from it. Again, S-curve. Remember S-curve, very important. So here we talk about innovation strategies for big companies and also for small companies. I'm going to just go through this very quickly. So the key point here is that for big companies, if you're going to be competitive over the long run, you cannot just focus on one of the three types. If you just focus on incremental innovations, chances are you are not going to be as competitive as those companies that engage in all three types. Because the companies that are involved in all three types will be able to outpace you and outcompete you. Now, if you only focus on breakthrough innovation, chances are you will have cash flow problem because it takes a long time to get the breakthrough innovation out. And then, of course, you will make a lot of money from it. But in the meantime, can you survive as a business? So the smart companies are those that will have a plan of innovation or a strategy for innovation that includes all three types. And that in the companies that have been doing that. Now, what about the small companies, the startup companies? Now, for those of you who are interested in this particular topic, I would encourage you to read the article on disruptive innovation by Christensen. And there are a couple of articles in Harvard Business Review that talk about this particular concept. So there are a couple of things I want to highlight here. When Christensen and his colleagues talk about disruptive innovation, they talk about 2 or 3 things that are very important. The first thing is that you are going to target a customer segment that is neglected by all the other companies, particularly the large firms. So you're not going to compete head-on with the established firms. You're going to find a niche. This market segment is pretty much neglected. But that will give you an opportunity to move in and build your customer base. And then the second element here is that you have to have a value proposition that's very different from the existing value propositions. The idea is a Southwest airline, they got started. The value proposition is just to get you there reliably with minimum amenities. You can afford to buy the ticket, to fly from here to there, but you don't have all these amenities that the other companies, airlines are providing at the time. And then the last one, which is also implied, is that you don't try to compete head-on with the big companies. You want to operate under their radar until you build up your base, and then you'll be able to have the strength to compete head-on later when you are strong enough. So these are just some ideas for the growth strategies. This slide has to do with entrepreneurship. And when we talk about entrepreneurship, the focus here is on creating new business ventures. And what I would like to propose here is there are different types of new business ventures here. And there are 3 dimensions along which we could classify a new business. And to give you an example, if you look at the left-hand side of the table, this is a new business that is serving an existing market, selling basically the same product and using the same production method. And an example to come in mind would be a fast food restaurant just opening up in another part of the town, basically a McDonald's or Taco Bell. So that would be a new business venture, but it has very little innovation. And then on the right-hand side would be the direct opposite of it. You come up with a new product, you create a new market, basically, and then you also use a new way of producing it. An example that comes as close to this would be Apple computer way back. Before then, it was all mainframe computers. And then the desktop computer is a new product. It creates a new market. It's individuals buying the computer. And then it also has a new way of putting together the computer. And then there are examples in between here. So again, this is important for us to understand because when we're talking about innovation and entrepreneurship, too often we think that there's only one category or one type, but in fact there are so many different types. And then from a policy decision maker's standpoint, it is important to ask yourself, or the government should ask the following question: which of these 8 types do we want to really push and promote? And then how can we get the entrepreneurs to focus on, for example, the 6, 7, and the 8 instead of the 1 and the 2 and the 3? because those on the right-hand side, to the right here, will give you a bigger return on economic benefits and job growth. All right, now this is all background information because I want to get to the next slide. And that is to involve you to talk about what does all this mean for Hong Kong. So the categories that we want to talk about have to do with what are some of the advantages that Hong Kong have, if any. And then what are some of the disadvantages? Now, when we talk about disadvantages, it's not all sad and negative, because any disadvantage that you have, or any country has, or any company has, is an opportunity. An opportunity to do something new and different, to fill that gap, if you will, and then make the company or the individual more competitive. Well, maybe I will go to the next slide to show you as an example of Australia, and then we come back and then we can talk about Hong Kong. So these are some of the competitive advantages that Australia as a country has. And it's based on the people that I talked to and based on many of the other research studies that have been done on Australia. So it's a very strong intellectual property protection. It's an advantage. Very strong corporate governance. Very strong banking system. Those are all good for a country. It is also within Asia, or the Asia-Pacific region, a rule-based society, which you cannot say for many countries in Asia-Pacific. And again, that has some implication. So with strong intellectual property protection, with strong corporate governance, and strong banking system, and then all the other items there too, is an ideal location for Western multinational firms to establish foreign R&D centers there, and also other types of high value added operations. If Australia can attract all these companies that have a lot of resources to come to Australia to set up R&D operations and high value advanced manufacturing, it will bring a lot of investment and a lot of high paying jobs. So that is the implication following from some of the advantages. And then another proposition here has to do with the high regard that apparently many consumers around the world place in Australia and other countries that can produce safe products. And a lot of countries produce unsafe products. So that means an opportunity for Australia is to have Australia be the location for product testing. And then you attach the label, tested in Australia. Business opportunity. Business opportunity. Take advantage of some of the advantages that the country has. All right, well, let's go to the other slide. Challenges. Australia does have a lot of challenges. So what are some of the challenges there? Small domestic market. 22 million people. 22 million people is a very small market. And shrinking manufacturing base. The unions are very strong there, and very, very high cost. So a lot of the manufacturing companies are leaving or have been leaving Australia now. High cost, high wages, distance and isolation. We all know that. Remedies and opportunities. If your domestic market is small, what that means is that your companies have to internationalize. So that would be a response to a small domestic market. And you will be surprised to hear that apparently a lot of the Australian companies are not that internationalized. And they are also unwilling to internationalize for various reasons. So that becomes a remedy and also an opportunity. If it is high cost, high tax and everything, then you really have to do the kind of business that will give you high revenue. So you cannot really compete at the low end. So manufacturing may be a good thing that they all move to other places, because if you pay the high wages to do the low value add manufacturing, then you're not really going to get the cost benefit at the level that you desire. So maybe drop that and then focus on R&D as a replacement for manufacturing, or advanced manufacturing as a replacement for the lower level type of manufacturing. And then there's another example here is to have public-private partnership, and also university to change the curriculum to do the kind of research that other countries may not be willing to do or have difficulties doing. So again, I'm going to use this as kind of an illustration of what you can do to identify some of the advantages or disadvantages for Hong Kong. So I'm going back to the slide here, and I think this is the time that I would like to really not be the speaker, but be the listener here. All right, so any ideas from the audience that maybe it's just identify a couple of advantages that you believe these are things that Hong Kong has, that we should build on this and then do something that is innovative. Yes?
I think among the rule-based society, Hong Kong probably has one of the lowest tax here.
Okay, so opposite to Australia, high tax in Australia, here we got low tax. What else do you think would be an advantage that we can build on in the case of Hong Kong?
In Hong Kong, we have a strong banking system.
Strong banking system, yes, true.
It may effectively got fundings for the innovators.
Okay, strong banking system. And that's the reason why Hong Kong is indeed a financial center, one of the financial centers in the world. Okay, so that is something that we should keep and to build on. And what we need would be financial innovations. Because if you don't innovate, compared to other financial centers in the world, you will still be getting the short end of the stick. So innovation gives you the big return. All right, what else? What else do you think we need to talk to? Yes?
We have a very good law system.
The legal system? All right. Okay, now that is important because in the case of Australia, they do highlight the legal system there. In terms of foreign direct investment, would that be an advantage? It is an advantage for foreign direct investment. But what kind of foreign direct investment has Hong Kong been getting up to now? What kind of foreign direct investment do we get in Hong Kong? Any major R&D investment from big companies? Like Singapore. Singapore is very, very unusual, being a very small country. It is one of the top countries in the world that is getting all the high-end R&D investment. Now, from my perspective, if I look at Singapore being able to attract all this high-end R&D, and the universities in Singapore and universities in Hong Kong are, at least from someone from the US looking to these two locations, they're quite comparable. So, so why is it that Hong Kong is not able to get any significant amount of R&D? That might be another opportunity to look into. Not so much, it's an easy one, but that might be an opportunity to do the investigation to find out why is Hong Kong not attracting R&D investment. I don't mean that it will be easy to do. I'm just brainstorming here. What else? What else do you think we can talk about in terms of Hong Kong being a place for innovation?
Compared to Australia, Hong Kong has relatively high internet penetration. We have fast broadband.
Okay.
Whereas Australia is only just starting to think about national broadband.
You mean the telecom infrastructure is quite strong here in Hong Kong? All right, okay, good, good. Well, the question is how to leverage that to your advantage. Now, I have thought about translation as something that Hong Kong might be willing or might be interested in investing. Translation in the sense of very highly trained, highly professional translators who can do the on real-time translation like those at UN. And then when there are international conferences here being held in Hong Kong, and there's so many international conferences here, a lot of international associations come to Hong Kong for conferences. And if Hong Kong has a large group of professional translators, translating into many different languages, and that can be a competitive advantage for Hong Kong to attract a lot more conferences from international professional organizations in particular, like in the medical field or like in engineering. Even though a lot of people do speak English at those conferences, there might be some conferences that are attended by people who might not have that level of English proficiency, and having the professional translators being so readily available in Hong Kong, that can be an innovative industry, if you will, if that has not been cultivated. All right, so I think my purpose of this talk is basically to introduce some basic concepts about innovation, and then also to use Australia as an example, and then also to give you some company examples, and hopefully this will start the conversation of innovation in Hong Kong with a focus on competition, and then with the hope that maybe you all will be involved and excited about innovation and start a conversation on a much larger scale. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.